David wiped the sweat from his forehead as he locked up his martial arts studio. It was almost 10 at night, and the streets of downtown were getting quieter. He had just finished teaching his evening self-defense class to a group of college students. Teaching people how to protect themselves always made him feel good about his work. The back alley behind his studio was dimly lit by a single street light. David grabbed the trash bags and walked toward the dumpster. That's when he heard the shouting coming from the main street. His body tensed up immediately. Years of training had taught him to recognize trouble. He quickly dumped the trash and jogged toward the noise. What he saw made his blood boil. 3 big guys were surrounding a young couple near their car. The woman was clearly scared, holding onto her boyfriend's arm. The boyfriend looked nervous, trying to calm the situation down. "Come on, just give us your wallet and nobody gets hurt," one of the men said with a nasty grin. He was the biggest of the 3, wearing a leather jacket that looked too tight on him. "Please, we don't want any trouble," the boyfriend replied, his voice shaking. David had seen enough. He couldn't just stand there and watch innocent people get robbed. Without thinking twice, he stepped out of the shadows. "Hey, leave them alone," David called out in a firm voice. The 3 men turned around, looking annoyed that someone had interrupted their plan. The big guy in the leather jacket laughed. "Mind your own business, hero. Walk away before you get hurt." David stayed calm. He had been in situations like this before. The key was to stay focused and not let emotions take over. He looked at the couple and nodded toward their car. "Get in your car and drive away, now." The boyfriend didn't need to be told twice. He quickly helped his girlfriend into the passenger seat and ran around to the driver's side. "I don't think so," the second guy said, moving to block their path. He was shorter, but looked mean, with tattoos covering his arms. That's when David moved. He had spent 15 years learning different fighting styles, but he always preferred to end conflicts quickly and safely. He stepped forward and grabbed the tattooed guy's wrist, twisting it just enough to make him stumble backward. The big guy in the leather jacket swung at David's head. David ducked easily and used his opponent's momentum against him. A quick push sent the big man crashing into a parked car. The third guy, who had been quiet until now, pulled out a pocket knife. David's heart rate increased, but his training kicked in. He had practiced disarming techniques hundreds of times. As the man lunged forward, David grabbed his wrist and applied pressure to a specific point. The knife clattered to the ground. Within 30 seconds, all 3 attackers were either on the ground or backing away, holding their sore wrists and egos. David hadn't seriously hurt any of them, but he had definitely gotten their attention. "The police are already on their way," David lied, hoping to scare them off completely. It worked. The 3 men looked at each other and decided they didn't want to stick around. As they hurried away, the big guy shouted back, "You got lucky tonight." David watched them disappear around the corner before checking on the couple. They were already in their car, but the boyfriend rolled down his window. "Thank you so much, man. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Just glad everyone's okay." David replied, "You should still call the police and report this." The couple nodded and drove away quickly. David stood alone in the street, his adrenaline still pumping. He was about to head back to the studio when he noticed someone watching him from across the street. It was a woman, standing under a lamppost about 50 feet away. Even from that distance, David could tell there was something different about her. She was tall and moved with a grace that reminded him of a dancer or maybe another martial artist. Her long, light-colored hair caught the street light in an unusual way. What struck him most was how she had been watching the entire fight. She wasn't looking around nervously like most people would after witnessing violence. Instead, she seemed completely calm, almost like she was studying what had happened. David started walking toward his studio, but he could feel her eyes following him. When he glanced back, she was walking in his direction. As she got closer, he could see her more clearly. She had the most unusual pale blue eyes he had ever seen, and her face had sharp, almost perfect features. "Excuse me," she called out in an accent he couldn't quite place. It sounded European, but not like any specific country he could identify. David stopped and turned around. Up close, she was even more striking. She carried herself with confidence that seemed almost royal. "I saw what you did back there," she continued, her voice smooth but somehow intense. "The way you fought those men." "I just helped some people in trouble," David replied, feeling a bit uncomfortable under her stare. She studied his face for a moment, then looked at his hands and the way he stood. It was like she was analyzing every detail about him. "You have excellent technique, very controlled. Most people would have hurt those men badly, but you chose not to." David was surprised. Not many people understood the difference between fighting to hurt someone and fighting to stop them. This woman clearly knew something about martial arts. "Violence should always be the last option," he said, "and when you do have to use it, you should use just enough to solve the problem." She nodded slowly, and a small smile appeared on her lips. But there was something in her expression that made David feel like she was seeing something he didn't understand. Then she said something that completely caught him off guard. "I wish you were my husband." David blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. "Excuse me, in my homeland, we value men who can fight but choose mercy. Men who protect the weak without becoming monsters themselves." Her pale eyes seemed to glow in the streetlight. "You are exactly the kind of man I would want as a life partner." David felt his cheeks getting warm. He had never had a stranger talk to him this way before. There was something both attractive and unsettling about her directness. "I'm sorry, but I don't even know your name," he managed to say. "My name is Zara," she replied, "and I have been looking for someone like you for a very long time." Before David could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between two buildings. He stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Who was this woman? How had she known so much about fighting techniques? And why had she said something so personal to a complete stranger? David walked back to the studio, locked the door, and drove home. But he couldn't stop thinking about Zara and her strange, intense eyes. Something told him this wasn't the last time he would see her. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. 3 days had passed since the strange encounter with Zara, but David couldn't get her out of his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her pale blue eyes and heard her unusual accent. He kept replaying her words, "I wish you were my husband." Who says something like that to a stranger? During his morning run through downtown, David found himself looking for her. He told himself he was just curious, but deep down he knew it was more than that. There had been something magnetic about Zara that he couldn't explain. On Thursday morning, while grabbing coffee from his usual spot, David's heart skipped a beat. There she was, sitting at a corner table with a laptop and what looked like old books spread around her. She was speaking quietly into her phone in a language that sounded harsh and unfamiliar. David ordered his coffee and tried to listen without being obvious. The language she was using had sounds he had never heard before. It wasn't Spanish, French, German, or any other European language he recognized. It almost sounded like she was speaking in some kind of code. When she finished her call, Zara looked up and their eyes met. She smiled and waved him over. "David, right?" she said as he approached her table. "I was hoping I would see you again." "How do you know my name?" David asked, sitting down across from her. "I asked around about the martial arts instructor who helped those people the other night. People speak very highly of you." David looked at the books on her table. They were thick volumes about geology and something called mineral distribution patterns. There were also printouts of what looked like satellite images of different locations around the world. "Interesting reading," David commented. Zara quickly closed the books. "Just research for my work. I study how different communities develop in various environments." "What kind of work do you do exactly?" "I'm an anthropologist. I travel to different places and observe how people live, how they interact with each other, how they solve problems." Her pale eyes studied his face. Like how some people choose to help strangers when they could just walk away. David felt that same uncomfortable feeling from the other night, like she was analyzing him. "Where are you from originally?" "I can't Place your accent. A small region in Eastern Europe. Very remote. Most people haven't heard of it. Zara packed up her books quickly. I should go. I have an appointment to get to. She stood up, but then paused and looked down at him. Would you like to have dinner sometime? I would enjoy learning more about your fighting techniques. David found himself nodding before he could think about it. Sure. How about Saturday? Perfect. I'll find you. With that mysterious comment, she left the coffee shop. David sat there wondering what he had gotten himself into. Something about Zara didn't add up, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Over the next few days, David started noticing Zara in the strangest places. On Friday, he saw her at the public library, sitting in the science section with a stack of books about physics and astronomy. She was taking notes in what looked like symbols rather than letters. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, was sitting with her and looked confused. I'm sorry, dear, but I don't understand your question about propulsion systems for long-distance travel, Mrs. Chen was saying. Are you writing a science fiction story? Zara shook her head. No, it's for my research. I need to understand how humans think about traveling to distant places. David hid behind a bookshelf and continued listening. Well, we have some books about space exploration and rocket science, Mrs. Chen offered, yes. But what about theoretical methods, ways that don't require chemical fuel? Mrs. Chen looked even more confused. I think you might want to talk to someone at the university. That's way beyond what I can help with. David watched as Zara thanked the librarian and gathered her books. As she walked past his hiding spot, she stopped and smiled. Enjoying your reading, David? His face turned red. I was just looking for a book about history. Of course you were. Her smile suggested she knew exactly what he had been doing. See you tomorrow night. That evening, David called his friend Mike, who worked for immigration services. They had gone to school together, and Mike owed him a favor from when David had taught his daughter self-defense classes for free. Hey Mike, I need you to check on someone for me. Nothing illegal. Just curious about a woman I met. Is this about a date? David, you know I can't just look up random people's information. Her name is Zara. She says she's from Eastern Europe. Works as an anthropologist. There's something strange about her, and I can't figure out what. Mike sighed. Fine, but you owe me big time. What's her last name? David realized he didn't know. She never told me, but she's tall, has very light blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and speaks with an unusual accent. That's not much to go on, but I'll see what I can find. The next morning, Mike called back with information that made David even more curious. Okay, this is weird. I found a Zara Kovac who entered the country 6 months ago on a research visa. But get this, her background check has more holes than Swiss cheese. What do you mean? No social media accounts, no digital footprint before 5 years ago. And the university she claims to have graduated from, it closed down 3 years ago. The references she provided all lead to organizations that either don't exist anymore or never existed in the first place. David felt a chill run down his spine. What else? Her visa application says she's here to study human behavioral patterns in urban environments. But here's the really strange part. She's been to 12 different countries in the past 5 years, always on similar research visas, and she never stays anywhere longer than 8 months after hanging up with Mike. David sat in his apartment trying to make sense of what he had learned. Who was Zara really? Why was she so interested in him? And why did she keep showing up everywhere? He went. That afternoon, while walking through the university district, David spotted Zara again. This time she was sitting in the back row of a large lecture hall. The professor was talking about theoretical physics and something called faster than light travel possibilities. David slipped into the hall and found a seat several rows behind her. The professor was explaining why traveling faster than light was considered impossible with current technology. Zara raised her hand. But what if you didn't need to travel through space? In the traditional sense, what if you could fold space itself? The professor looked surprised. That's a very advanced concept. Are you a physics student? No. But I'm very interested in how humans think about solving impossible problems. Well, theoretically, if we could manipulate space-time, we might be able to create shortcuts across vast distances. But the energy requirements would be enormous, and we don't have any materials that could withstand those forces. Zara nodded thoughtfully. What if the materials came from somewhere else? Somewhere with different physical properties, the professor laughed. You mean like alien technology? That's pure science fiction. David watched as Zara's expression changed. For just a moment, she looked almost sad. Of course, she said quietly, pure fiction. After the lecture, David followed Zara outside. She was walking toward the parking garage when she suddenly stopped and turned around. I know you've been following me, David, and I know you've been asking questions about me. David felt caught. I'm sorry. I was just curious. You're very mysterious. Mystery can be dangerous, Zara said, but her voice was gentle. Are you sure? You want to know more about me? David looked into her pale blue eyes and saw something that looked almost like warning. But his curiosity was stronger than his caution. Yes, he said. I want to know who you really are. Zara studied his face for a long moment. Then tomorrow night, after our dinner, I'll show you something that will answer all your questions. But David, she stepped closer to him. Once you know the truth, there's no going back to not knowing. As she walked away, David wondered what he was getting himself into. Something told him his quiet life as a martial arts instructor was about to become much more complicated. Saturday evening came faster than David expected. He had spent the entire day wondering what Zara meant when she said she would show him something that would answer all his questions. Part of him was excited, but another part was worried about what he might discover. They met at a small restaurant downtown. Zara looked different somehow, more relaxed than he had seen her before. She wore a simple blue dress, but there was still something about the way she moved that seemed almost otherworldly. You look nervous, Zara said with a small smile as they sat down. Wouldn't you be? A mysterious woman tells you she's going to reveal some big secret. That's not exactly a normal date. Normal is overrated, Zara replied, looking at the menu. David, before I show you what I promised, I need to ask you something important. Okay, why do you teach martial arts? What drives you to help people learn how to protect themselves? David thought about the question. I guess because I believe everyone deserves to feel safe. And I think strength should be used to protect people, not hurt them. Zara's pale eyes lit up. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. After dinner, they walked to David's martial arts studio. He had been planning to show her some basic techniques, but Zara had other ideas. Would you mind if I join your Monday evening class? She asked as they entered the studio. Sure, but I should warn you, most of my students have been training for months. It might be better if you started with the beginner class. Zara smiled. Let me show you something first. She asked David to demonstrate a basic defensive move. He showed her how to block a punch and counter with a simple wrist grab. Zara watched carefully, asking him to repeat it twice. Now let me try, she said. David threw a slow, controlled punch toward her shoulder. What happened next made his jaw drop. Zara didn't just block his punch. She moved like she had been training for years. Her block was perfect. Her counter move was flawless, and her balance was incredible. How did you do that? David asked, staring at her in amazement. Show me something more difficult. David demonstrated a complex combination that took most of his students months to master. It involved blocking, stepping, and redirecting an opponent's energy in a specific sequence. Zara watched him do it once, then copied it perfectly. This is impossible, David muttered. Nobody learns that fast. Teach me something else. For the next hour, David showed Zara increasingly difficult techniques each time. She mastered them after seeing them just once or twice. It wasn't just that she was learning the moves, she seemed to understand the principles behind them instantly. When David showed her how to use an opponent's momentum against them, Zara nodded and said, yes, you're using their own force to defeat them. Very efficient. How do you know so much about fighting theory? David asked. In my homeland, physical training is very important. Everyone learns to fight from a young age. Where exactly is your homeland? And don't tell me it's just Eastern Europe. I've been thinking about it, and your accent doesn't match any European language I know. Zara stopped practicing and looked at him seriously. You really want to know? Yes. Then come to my apartment tomorrow. I'll show you things that will explain everything. The next evening, David found himself standing outside a small apartment building on the edge of town. Zara's place was on the third floor, and when she opened the door, David was surprised by what he saw. The apartment was almost empty. There was basic furniture, but no personal items, no pictures, no decorations. It looked like someone who was just passing through. You don't have much stuff, David commented. I don't need much, Zara replied, but there are some things I want. To show you, she led him to a small table where several objects were laid out. David had never seen anything like them before. There was a small device that looked like a combination of metal and crystal. Something that appeared to be a book but was made of a material he couldn't identify. And what looked like a piece of jewelry that seemed to glow with its own light. What are these? David asked. Tools from home? Zara picked up the small device. This is a communication device. Watch. She pressed something on the device, and suddenly the air above it filled with tiny points of light, like a three-dimensional map of stars. David could see planets, moons, and what looked like travel routes connecting different solar systems. This is impossible, David whispered, reaching out to touch the holographic display. His hand passed right through it, but he could feel a slight tingling sensation. This is a map of local star systems, Zara explained calmly. The bright lines show safe travel routes between worlds. David's legs felt weak. He sat down heavily in a chair. Are you saying you're from another planet? Yes. That's crazy. Aliens don't exist. People would know if aliens were visiting Earth. Zara turned off the device and the star map disappeared. David, your governments have known about us for decades, but they agreed to keep our presence quiet while we study your world. Why would you need to study us? Because my people are looking for a new home. Our world is dying, and we need to find a place where we can live peacefully alongside another species. Zara sat down across from him. But we don't want to just take over a planet. We want to find people we can work with, people we can trust. David's mind was racing. And that's why you're here. To find people you can trust, partly. I'm what you might call a scout. I travel to different worlds, study their inhabitants, and identify individuals who might be good ambassadors between our species. And you think I could be an ambassador? Zara's pale eyes met his. David, in my culture, we choose life partners based on their strength, wisdom, and compassion. When I saw you that night, fighting those men but not hurting them more than necessary, I knew you were special. So when you said you wished I was your husband, I meant it. On my world, you would be considered an ideal mate, someone strong enough to protect others, but wise enough to show mercy. David stood up and walked to the window. The city lights twinkled below, and everything looked the same as it always had. But somehow, everything was different now. How many of you are there? Here on Earth, I mean. About 50 scouts, spread across different countries. We've been here for 5 years, learning your languages, your customs, your ways of thinking. And what happens next? Zara joined him at the window. That depends on what we report back to our people. If we believe humans and my people can coexist peacefully, then we'll begin making formal contact with your leaders. David turned to look at her, and if not, then we'll find another world. They stood in silence for several minutes. David's practical mind was telling him this was all impossible, but the evidence was right there in front of him. The holographic star map, Zara's incredible fighting abilities, her strange knowledge about physics and space travel. It all made sense now. Why are you telling me this? David asked finally. Because I believe you can handle the truth. And because Zara hesitated. Because I've grown to care about you. In my culture, we don't hide important things from people we care about. David looked into her pale blue eyes and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Despite all her otherworldly abilities and knowledge, she looked vulnerable, almost afraid. Are you scared? He asked gently. Yes, Zara admitted. I'm scared that once you fully understand what I am, You won't want anything to do with me. I'm scared that I've broken the rules by telling you the truth. And I'm scared that my feelings for you are going to make it impossible for me to do my job." David reached out and took her hand. It felt completely normal, completely human. "I'm scared too," he said. "But I'm glad you told me. Whatever happens next. At least now I understand why you seemed so different." Zara squeezed his hand. "So what do we do now?" David smiled. "Now you teach me more about where you come from, and I'll teach you more about what it means to be human." As they sat down together, David realized his life had just become far more complicated than he ever imagined. But looking at Zara, seeing the hope in her eyes, he knew it was also about to become far more interesting. 2 weeks had passed since Zara revealed her true identity to David. During that time, his world had been turned completely upside down. Every day brought new discoveries about her abilities. In her mission on Earth, David found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything he had learned. The woman he was falling in love with was from another world. It sounded like something from a science fiction movie, but he had seen the proof with his own eyes. Zara had been patient with his questions, answering everything honestly. She explained how her people's technology worked, why they had chosen Earth as a potential new home, and how the selection process for ambassadors functioned. "We don't just look for strong fighters," she had told him one evening as they walked through the park. "We look for people who understand that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them." David was struggling with the implications of what she had shared. If her people decided to make contact with Earth's governments, everything would change. If they decided Earth wasn't suitable, Zara would leave forever. "What's bothering you?" Zara asked one Friday evening as they sat in his apartment. She had gotten better at reading human emotions over the past few weeks. "I keep thinking about what happens when your mission ends," David admitted. "Will you have to go back home?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. "My original assignment was for 8 months. I have 2 months left, and then I return to my world and report my findings to the council." David felt his heart sink. "So this is temporary. Whatever we have between us, it doesn't have to be." Zara moved closer to him on the couch. "David, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, on my world or any other world I've visited. But your people need you to come back. They need my report." But after that, Zara took his hand. "There are options. If my people decide to establish a permanent presence on Earth, I could request to stay as part of the contact team." David wanted to feel hopeful, but something in her voice told him it wasn't that simple. "What aren't you telling me?" Zara sighed. "The council is very strict about personal relationships with the species we're studying. If they discover that I've developed feelings for a human, they might consider my judgment compromised. So you're risking your career by being with me." "I'm risking more than that. If the council decides I've violated our protocols, I could be banned from ever returning to Earth." David pulled his hands away and stood up. "Zara, I can't ask you to give up everything for me. Your family, your home, your people. You're not asking. I'm choosing." Zara stood up too, her pale eyes intense. "David, my people are very logical. They make decisions based on facts and analysis. But being with you has taught me something they don't understand." "What's that?" "That love isn't logical, and that some things are worth risking everything for." The next day, Zara suggested they take a weekend trip to the mountains. "I want to show you something special," she said, "and I need to contact my ship." They drove 2 hours outside the city to a national forest. Zara directed David to a remote camping area that seemed to be completely deserted. As they set up their tent, David noticed that Zara seemed more relaxed than he had ever seen her. "You like it out here," he observed. "On my world, most of our cities are underground. We had to move below the surface when our sun began to die." Zara breathed deeply. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be under an open sky." That evening, they built a campfire and sat looking up at the stars. The night was clear, and the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. "Can you see your home from here?" David asked. Zara pointed to a section of the sky. "It's in that direction, but too far to see even with your best telescopes." The trip here took us almost 3 of your years. How did you learn to speak English so well? We studied your transmissions for decades before coming here. Television, radio, internet communications. By the time I arrived, I had been listening to human voices for most of my life. David thought about that. So you knew about us before you ever met us. I knew about human technology, human languages, human conflicts, but I didn't understand human emotions until I came here. Zara looked at him. Until I met you. Around midnight, Zara pulled out her communication device. I need to contact my ship and give them an update on my mission. Your ship is out there somewhere, on what you call the dark side of your moon. It's been there for 5 years. Zara activated the device, and the familiar holographic star map appeared. But this time, she touched different controls. And suddenly a voice spoke from the device. It was speaking in the same harsh-sounding language David had heard her use at the coffee shop. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. David couldn't understand the words, but he could tell from Zara's tone that she was being careful about what she said. When she turned off the device, David asked, "What did you tell them?" "I reported on human defensive capabilities and social structures. I told them about the martial arts training programs and how humans teach each other to fight without causing unnecessary harm." "Did you tell them about us?" Zara shook her head. "Not yet, but David, there's something else I need to tell you, something I learned during that communication." David felt his stomach tighten. "What?" "The council has decided to accelerate our timeline. Instead of 2 more months, I have 2 more weeks before I have to return." 2 weeks. David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. "Why?" "Our sun is dying faster than we expected. My people need to make a decision about Earth soon, or we'll have to look elsewhere." David stared into the fire, trying to process this news. 2 weeks wasn't enough time for anything. Not enough time to figure out their relationship. Not enough time to prepare for her leaving. "There's more," Zara said quietly. "The council has ordered all scouts to avoid any personal entanglements with humans. They're concerned that emotional attachments might cloud our judgment. So they know about us. They suspect. My supervisor noticed changes in my recent reports. I've been more positive about human potential than my initial assessments indicated." David looked up at the stars, trying to imagine Zara's ship hidden behind the moon. "What happens if they find out for sure? They'll recall me immediately and assign someone else to complete my mission. And you'll never be allowed to come back. Never." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire burn down to glowing coals. Finally, David spoke. "Zara, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll put your mission first. Your people need you to make the right decision about Earth. And that's more important than whatever we have." Zara turned to look at him, her pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "David, you don't understand. What we have isn't separate from my mission anymore. You've shown me that humans are capable of love, sacrifice, and wisdom. Those are exactly the qualities my people need to see. But if the council thinks your judgment is compromised, then I'll have to prove that my feelings for you make me a better judge of human character, not a worse one." David reached over and took her hand. "How do we do that?" "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not giving up on us without a fight." As they prepared for bed, David looked up at the stars one more time. Somewhere up there, Zara's people were waiting for her report. In 2 weeks, she would have to choose between her mission and their relationship. David had never felt so small and insignificant, but he had also never been more determined to fight for something. Whatever happened, he wasn't going to lose Zara without doing everything he could to keep her. The next morning, as they packed up their campsite, Zara was quiet and thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" David asked. "I'm thinking about what I'm going to tell the council when I return to the ship." "What will you tell them?" Zara smiled, and for the first time since their conversation the night before, she looked hopeful. "I'm going to tell them that I've found exactly what we've been looking for, a species worth saving, and a world worth sharing." As they drove back toward the city, David realized that the next 2 weeks would determine not just their future together, but possibly the future of both their species. The final week arrived faster than David had hoped. Every day felt precious now that he knew Zara would soon have to return to her ship and face the council's questions. They spent every possible moment together, and David found himself memorizing small details about her, the way she laughed at his jokes, how she studied people with genuine curiosity, the gentle way she corrected his pronunciation when she taught him words from her language. On Tuesday evening, Zara came to David's martial art studio to say goodbye to the students. Over the past month, she had been attending classes regularly and had become popular with everyone. Of course, they had no idea about her true abilities or origins. Zara's moving back to Europe for work, David explained to the class, sticking to the cover story they had agreed on. After the class ended and the students left, David and Zara sat alone in the quiet studio. "I'm going to miss this place," Zara said, looking around at the training equipment and motivational posters on the walls. "You could always open your own martial arts school when you get home," David suggested, trying to keep the mood light. "My people don't really understand the concept of teaching fighting skills for personal growth for us. Combat training is purely practical. Maybe you could change that, bring back some new ideas." Zara smiled sadly. "If they let me stay long enough to implement new ideas." That night, lying in bed, David made a decision. He couldn't just wait passively for Zara to leave. If there was any chance of making this work, he needed to do something. "Zara," he said in the darkness, "I want to meet them." "Meet who?" "Your people, the council. I want to speak to them myself." Zara sat up quickly. "David, that's impossible. Humans aren't allowed on our ships. The protocols are very strict." "Then ask them to meet me somewhere else. Tell them that if they want to understand humans, they should talk to one directly." "They would never agree to that. Try, please." "What's the worst that could happen?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. "The worst that could happen is they decide you're a security risk and order me to have nothing more to do with you." "And the best that could happen?" "The best that could happen is they realize that humans are worth getting to know." The next morning, Zara contacted her ship. David couldn't understand the conversation, but he could tell it was heated. Zara's voice became more urgent as the discussion continued, and at one point she seemed to be arguing with whoever was on the other end. When she finally turned off the device, she looked exhausted. "What did they say?" David asked. "They said absolutely not. Humans are not allowed to have direct contact with council members under any circumstances." David felt his hopes crash. "So that's it?" "Not exactly." Zara's eyes had a mischievous glint. "They said you couldn't meet with the council. They didn't say you couldn't meet with me while I'm making my final report." "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow night, I have to return to the ship for a formal debriefing. It's supposed to be just me, answering questions about my observations and recommendations, and if you happen to be with me when I receive the summons, and if you insisted on coming along to ensure my safety, well." Zara shrugged. "Sometimes protocols have to be bent in unusual circumstances." David felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. "Are you serious? You'd really take me to your ship, David? I'm already in trouble for developing feelings for you. At this point, I might as well be in trouble for something worthwhile." The next evening, David found himself standing in a remote field outside the city, looking up at a sky full of stars. Zara had used her communication device to call for transport, and now they were waiting. "Are you sure about this?" Zara asked. For the third time, "No, I'm terrified," David admitted, "but I'm sure I want to try. There are things you should know before we go up there. My people look similar to humans, but there are differences. Don't stare, and don't be afraid if they seem cold or unfriendly. They're not being rude. They just don't express emotions the way humans do. Anything else? Be honest. They can detect lies very easily. And whatever you do, don't try to shake hands or make any physical contact unless they initiate it." A low humming sound filled the air, and David looked up to see something impossible. A section of the night sky was moving, blocking out stars as it descended toward them. The ship was completely invisible except for the stars it blocked out. "Cloaking technology," Zara explained. We've been studying your world for 5 years without anyone noticing." The ship landed silently in the field. David still couldn't see it clearly, but he could feel its presence, something large and solid right in front of them. A section of air shimmered, and suddenly an opening appeared. "Ready?" Zara asked, taking his hand. David nodded, not trusting his voice to work properly. They stepped through the opening, and David's breath caught in his throat. The interior of the ship was unlike anything he had imagined. The walls seemed to be made of the same crystal-like material he had seen in Zara's communication device, and they glowed with a soft, warm light. Everything was curved and organic-looking, more like being inside a living creature than a machine. Two figures approached them, and David had to remind himself not to stare. They looked humanoid but were taller than most humans, with the same pale eyes as Zara but more angular features. Their skin had a slight silvery tint, and they moved with perfect coordination. They spoke to Zara in their harsh-sounding language, and David could tell they were not happy about his presence. "They want to know why I brought you here," Zara translated. "Tell them I asked to come. Tell them I wanted to speak for my species," Zara translated. And one of the figures stepped closer to David. When it spoke, its voice was deeper than he expected, but surprisingly gentle. "I am Council Member Vex," the figure said in accented but clear English. "Zara has broken our protocols by bringing you here." "That's my fault," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I insisted on coming. I wanted you to know that not all humans are afraid of learning about other species. Fear is not our concern. Compatibility is our concern." "Then let me show you that we're compatible." Vex studied David for a long moment. "You are the human Zara has been observing. Yes. She believes your species has potential for peaceful coexistence with ours. I believe that too." The second council member spoke to Vex in their language, then addressed David directly. "I'm Council Member Kane. We have observed your species for many years. You are violent, unpredictable, and driven by emotions that often override logical thinking." David felt a flash of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. "That's true sometimes. But we're also capable of love, sacrifice, and growth. We can learn to be better." "How do you know this?" "Because Zara has been teaching me about your people, and I've been teaching her about mine. We've both changed through knowing each other." Vex and Kane exchanged a look that David couldn't interpret. Zara's recent reports have shown significant deviation from her initial assessments, Vex said. "We believe her judgment has been compromised by emotional attachment." "Her judgment has been improved by emotional attachment," David replied. "You can't really understand a species without caring about them. Emotional attachment leads to bias. Emotional attachment leads to understanding." For the next hour, David found himself in the strangest conversation of his life. The council members asked him questions about human nature, human conflicts, and human potential. They seemed particularly interested in his martial arts training and his philosophy about using strength to protect rather than dominate your species. "Trains for combat but claims to value peace," Kane observed. "This seems contradictory." "We train for combat so we can protect peace," David explained. "The strongest people should be the ones most committed to avoiding violence." This is what Zara has reported. "But can you prove this philosophy extends beyond individuals to your entire species?" David thought carefully before answering. "No, I can't prove that. But I can prove that some humans are willing to risk everything to protect others, even people they've never met. And if some humans can think that way, then maybe more can learn to think that way." Vex turned to Zara. "Scout Zara, what is your final recommendation regarding this species?" Zara stood straighter, and David could see the determination in her pale eyes. "Council members, I recommend that we proceed with formal contact. Humans have the capacity for growth, compassion, and wisdom. They also have the strength to help us survive and thrive in this new world." "In your personal relationship with this human," Kane asked, "how has it affected your judgment?" "It has given me insights that I could never have gained through observation alone. Love isn't a weakness that clouds judgment. It's a strength that clarifies what really matters." Vex and Kane stepped away and spoke quietly in their own language for several minutes. When they returned, Vex addressed both David and Zara. The Council will consider your recommendations. Scout Zara, you will remain on Earth for an additional 6 months to continue your observations. During this time, you will work with David to establish preliminary contact protocols with selected human representatives. David felt his heart leap with hope. However, Kane continued, "This extended mission is conditional. If your personal relationship interferes with your duties in any way, you will be recalled immediately." "I understand," Zara said. "And David of Earth,